remember one time we were in Bozeman, Montana. We were traveling in through the hills there, and I remember that we crashed into a snowbank in the hills. You know, God knows what was on the other side of that snowbank. I don't like to think about it. And I remember sitting there thinking, being quite relaxed about it. And exactly like you mentioned earlier on, it's like, even if I freeze to death, there's a lot better than sitting in the office getting told off because I didn't hit my targets. This is what I was meant to do. If I die doing it, then so be it. You know, I'd rather live for 20 years on the plains being free than live for 50 years sat in a cage in a zoo. And I guess that's how I think about life sometimes.
Hey, what's up, Vox and Hops heads? I'm Matt, the vocalist of Cryptopsy and the host of the Vox and Hops Metal Podcast, brought to you by Sound Talent Media and Evergreen Podcasts, where I sit down with fellow metal musicians to talk about their lives, music, and craft beer. Hope you had a killer weekend. I most certainly did. This Vox and Hops episode is presented by Heavy Montreal. Heavy Montreal are Montreal's premier metal promoter, and they have a massive amount of killer gigs coming through Montreal throughout the month of November. Merciful Fate is here with Creator at Midnight on November 11th. Vola is here with Earthside on November 13th. 3 Days Grace is coming with The Warning and The Standstills on November 20th. And the Trinity of Terror tour featuring Ice Kills Nines, Black Veil Brides, Motionless in White, and Atreyu will be here in Montreal on November 21st. If you would like to get your tickets to any of these shows, head on over to their website, heavymontreal.com. I have put the link to that in the description of this podcast. I will be at some of these gigs, so you most certainly should come as well. Come hang out with me at some of these Heavy Montreal Presents gigs throughout the month of November. I am beyond stoked to have Heavy Montreal behind the Vox and Hops Metal Podcast. Now, before we jump into today's episode, I'd just like to ask you to follow the Vox and Hops Metal Podcast on the podcast platform of your choice. But more than that, I would love for you to tell a friend about the podcast. If there's someone in your life that is just like an entrepreneur, that friend that is always hustling, I would love for you to tell them that the Vox and Hops Metal Podcast exists. You could tell them that there are over 370 episodes where I sit down with some of the world's best musicians and we talk all about their life and music while sharing a craft beer. If you were to encourage one of your hustler friends to become a brand new Vox and Hops head, that would be something that I would truly appreciate. Now, today on the podcast, I'm very stoked to be joined by John Davis of Conan. Get ready, everyone. This is Vox and Hops episode number 377.
I warn you, what you are about to hear is very disturbing indeed.
Hey, what's up, everyone? Today, I'm with John Davis of Conan. John, how you doing?
Yeah, I'm good. Really good. Thank you, Matt. How are you?
Great. It's Saturday. It's for people to know. It's like early September, mid-September. We're having this chat. It's going to come out later, as these things do. But it was really hot, and now it's sort of cooled down here in Montreal, and it's actually a welcome for a change. It was really hot. Yeah.
We've had the press have spoken over here about us having a couple of heat waves, but honestly, we've had like a few days here and there where it's been hotter than normal. The rest of the time, it's just been completely English, you know, completely British, I should say, and it's just been cold, or you know, we've had a few bit of sun, but not really had any hot weather. I've got freckles, so I guess I'm quite grateful. Really, I'm not very good with the sun. I burn very easily.
My wife is exactly the same, so I completely understand, especially on the freckle front. I know exactly what you're talking about. But it's been blazingly hot here in Montreal, so it's nice to have a little bit of a lull. Let me ask you the shittiest question I'm going to ask you. From here on out, it'll be much more fun, but we got to dance through this annoying question that everyone starts with. John, how did you cope with the glorious years of 2020, 2021, most of 2022, hopefully not the rest of 2022, and most certainly, hopefully not any of 2023? How have you been doing during these wonderful times?
I've got a little bit grayer. But I think I should have shares in Just Eat now. I've spent that much money on takeaways. And actually okay, pretty good. I developed, renewed my love for gaming. So I just got completely and utterly into Warzone. In a mad way. I rekindled my affair with EVE Online, so I played those two games a lot during lockdown. But musically, you know, we wrote an album basically in lockdown and recorded it towards the end of 2021. Re-recorded the album remotely for the most part.
Interesting.
And yeah, so I mean, and also I mean, I had like a management agency, a record label, and in lockdown I developed a software, or with the help of software developers, started working on a software platform which is like a networking and management platform specifically for the entertainment industry. You know, like being able to find the right contacts and make contact with them in a more direct and sort of industry specific way than you can do on Facebook, you know.
Absolutely.
So we're about to, I mean, just this week we're about to get news on quite a large government grant, and we've got some private sector investment lined up on the back of that. So coming out of, I was determined to come out of lockdown better than I was when I entered it. So yeah, my life has changed quite a bit. I got married in January 2020,
Mm-hmm.
and then my wife is from New Zealand. So
Oh.
I got married in Auckland, and I was like, oh yeah, well, we'll see you in a couple of months. And then everything shut down, of course.
Mm-hmm.
And she wasn't able to get over here until like August, September 2020. So that was kind of an insane period. And then, of course, the whole like us being in lockdown was hard. You know, Sarah couldn't go anywhere. She's in a different country, and there's all different rules. So that was a big challenge for us as a couple. And but yeah, I was determined to come out a bit better than it was when I went in. So I think I've achieved that. You know, winning on a few different fronts, which is good.
That's an excellent way to approach the pandemic and the lockdown and those years to better yourselves. I always joke that there's two ways to come out of COVID, either in shape or out of shape. Sadly, I've been teetering on the line thanks to my main passion, which is craft beer, but it seems like you've approached it in a more positive aspect. So congrats to you on that, John. The management thing, I definitely want to talk about that a little bit more after, because I think that's super interesting. And I do agree that it's extremely hard to speak with people directly without getting an introduction. So I can imagine that's like the vetting process is something that gets eliminated once you're a part of this platform. And absolutely, that's crazy that your wife was in New Zealand, and New Zealand being on an island, they just locked everything down and there was no escaping, no coming. So that must have been very difficult for you.
Yeah. It was a crazy time, and obviously we were used to or accustomed to being apart from each other because of that. I mean, even before lockdown, Sarah could only spend a certain amount of time in the UK. So we did have periods when we were apart. So that was not that weird at first, but then just that, like, when we wanted to when she wanted to come over here, not being able to was really frustrating. And we didn't know when the office there was going to open. There was no, there was literally no updates whatsoever. We just had no idea when we were going to get this visa process.
And the uncertainty that kills us as humans, I think.
Yeah. It was an uncertain time. Yeah, you're right, Matt. And it was like, people from New Zealand are generally very, very upbeat, and generally as people, people from Liverpool, I find, where I'm from. So I think we got through that period quite well. The biggest challenge was when Sarah actually came over here and getting used to being sort of in lockdown in a foreign country for her, because up until then our lives together were all about being on tour, and there was always a trip around the corner somewhere cool, and to not have that, I think, was something that it was hard to accept.
And living with people is always a challenge, especially if there's no candy at the end of the road, that little trip that it's just the lull of this is life. It's something that we have to get. Luckily, I've been with my wife for 20 years, so we went through that early on. The first years are the toughest for sure. And I wasn't in a global pandemic. Vox&Hops is all about hanging out with my metal friends, talking about their lives, music, and craft beer. What beer are we going to be sharing virtually today? What beer do you have on your side? Present it to us, please.
Okay, so the beer I have here is a beer that was made for us by David Perry, who's a friend of mine from Liverpool. played bass in Conan in 2012 when we did our split with Slamatics, and also provided synth and vocoder on Grief Sequence, which is the last song on our new album. And Dave, in addition to being the tallest man I've ever seen, is he works at this brewery in Copenhagen called Dry Bitter.
Really?
Yeah, and he works there, and this is the second beer he's made for us. So this particular beer is like quite a hazy IPA. I'm not an expert on beer, by the way, but I know what I like. Hop heavy IPA brewed in collaboration with the mightiest purveyors of caveman battle doom, Conan. So that's quite a nice intro. But yeah, it's really nice. I mean, I've got a couple of boxes of it here. I owe a box to Chris, our bass player. I keep telling him I'll drop it off. Hopefully, I won't drink it before that time comes.
That never happens.
No, yeah. He'll kill me if I do it. It'll kill me if I drink it, though, better not. But it's 6%. It's really good, really tasty, nice and cold. I really like it. I'm more of a stout person generally, porter and stout. And in fact, last night I was drinking like this Nutella flavored stout from the place.
Amazing.
This place called Glen Afric.
Very cool.
Yeah,
very cool. It's cool that it's David that made the beer, because I was definitely going to ask about having Dave on Evidence of Immortality. I love when there's like a theme with Conan that I've been seeing, that you guys continually work with the same people.
Yeah.
And I think that's super cool. We'll touch on it later, but I'll introduce my beer first. That beer does sound really cool. I mean, can art is awesome. This is my brand new collab, which was created by La Pâtisserie, which is a very young metal brewery. They're not like metal themed, but it's ran by metalheads from here in Montreal. And it was brewed for my event that I just had, Heavy Montreal presents Vox&Hops Brewtal Montreal, which was featuring Deicide and Cataclysm and Human Condition. And this is a I always say this wrong. This is Světlé Výčepní. It's a light Czech lager, 4%. I love it, and I'm all about it. Let me crack this, pour it out, and while I'm doing that, I would love to hear about your very first beer, John. Do you remember the first beer that you had? And I imagine it was in a pub somewhere.
First beer? Well, the first beer that I drank in a pub would have been probably Newcastle Brown Ale, which was when I was a young man, and I'm talking like 15 or 16, we would sneak into the pub, and I won't name the pub, but we'd sneak in there before it was legal for us to do so.
At least it's still open. That's cool.
It is still open, yes. And we would sneak in there and try and make our pocket money stretch as far as it could go. So for me, that was taking my lunch money from my mum and putting it in my pocket instead of spending it at school, and instead making myself an egg sandwich after she'd gone to work. And then I would have egg sandwiches on my lunch so I could drink beer on a Friday.
That is sacrifice.
Yeah. I mean, egg sandwiches are cool too, so it wasn't too bad. But I would.
Your mom's like, "Where are the eggs? I had eggs here."
I don't think she ever cottoned onto it, but on a Friday, then we would. And Newcastle Brown was like a larger bottle than a regular beer in the pub. So I thought, well, I'll get Newcastle Brown, so I could probably afford 2 or 3 bottles of that on my week's lunch money. So yeah, that was my first beer in the pub. I think probably 16 years old. Trying to not to get drunk and failing because I had no real experience with alcohol then.
It's something that we learn over time. Hopefully, yeah, it's still a learning process some days. How about craft beer? You said that you're not the biggest expert, but you were sipping on a stout that tasted like Nutella last night. So you've stepped away from the largest beer for the price and more towards the craft. So to tell me about that experience and how you've refined your palate, let's say.
Well, now I've got a bit more disposable income, and I don't have to steal eggs. Don't have to steal eggs off my parents anymore. I can afford to buy normal beer. I think. Yeah, it was probably quite a while ago that I stopped being like really into regular lager, and I still enjoy it when I do drink it. But I always seem to, if I'm going to have a beer, I always seem to think, oh yeah, I'll get like a stout or a porter. And I wonder whether or not that's because of, on my mum's side, all my family are from Ireland, from my great grandparents back, and so Guinness and porters, the bottled Guinness, which was more like a fizzy porter, always been in the family. And my great grandmother, who we used to call Nin, by the way, and I don't know why, it's not an Irish word apparently, according to our drummer Johnny. She would always drink Guinness. She'd have a bottle of Guinness every day, and she lived till she was in her 90s. So
amazing.
There's something in that. So yeah, it's kind of gone from lager when I was younger to more like porter and stout now. I think because I don't drink a lot anyway. So when I do drink, I'd like to have like a strong, heavy drink. If I'm only going to have one or two, I want it to be more of a challenge. Excuse me. And I find that porter and stout tend to be just a little bit different. So I do like that.
They're definitely heavier beers for sure, and more filling. And the ABV is slightly higher than a lager, let's say, but in the whole hazy IPA world, ABVs are extremely high now, so it doesn't fall into that same category. That's cool, and you know, a Guinness a day sounds a good way to go.
It would be a good way to go. I have a day job at the moment, so probably not. I wouldn't be. They wouldn't allow me to do that in the home office. But I'll maybe at some point I'll try and get away with it after I resign. But yeah, I do actually really like Belgian beers as well, and I sort of had like I was introduced to them in a serious way. We played a magazine for Citra once when we played in Brussels. Yeah, and we played there with a band called The Moth. And I'd had like a Belgian beer or two here and there up until this point. But after the show, me and Freyden, their guitarist vocalist, just sat at the bar. We were staying in the accommodation within the venue, and the bar's like, you know, like a DIY venue, actually really big. I don't know if you've ever played there or been there for a show.
I've definitely played Brussels. I'm not sure if I played that venue.
Yeah, it's really awesome. And so we sat at the bar and we were just drinking like Chimay Blue or we would La Chouffe, and the triple beers. And I don't know how many we had, but like Freyden speaks very good English. He's German. He speaks very good English. But I noticed that his ability to speak English started to desert him as the night went on. Eventually, he was just making these like clicking noises instead of actual words, because he a little bit drunk, and maybe I was also drunk, and I making more of this than it actually was at the time. But my recollection was that he would couldn't think of the word for what he was trying to say, and would just be making these clicking sounds. And then as the night wore on, most of what he was saying was clicking noises instead of actual words. It was insane, all because of that Belgian beer.
I have similar experiences. We typically play Belgium, and then the next day, for some reason, the next show is London.
Oh yeah.
Typically, this is the routing that happens for some reason. Every time we wake up in Belgium, Flo, our drummer, leader of the band, looks to us all and says, "Don't get too drunk tonight because we're taking the ferry tonight."
Yeah.
Every single time. The Belgian beers get us.
Yeah. They're just so nice. I mean, the hangover is terrible if you get a hangover, but dear God, but it's just something. There's something I just like intense flavored beer, which is probably why I gravitate towards stout and porter.
Very, very cool. The soundtrack, your youth classic Vox&Hops question. I'd love to hear about when you were not in control of the music at home. What music did your parents or guardians listen to?
I didn't get a lot of music from my parents, honestly, but my recollection was my dad would listen to this band called the Traveling Wilburys. Do you remember them?
I know the name, and there's definitely a movie called that, but it's completely not that.
Yeah, I think it was like a super group with Roy Orbison and a few of the other people of his generation, like a guitar rock band, and I can't remember all the members now, but it was kind of like Roy Orbison style, sort of light rock. and my dad listened and listens to that kind of stuff a lot. And my mum was more of a Motown person. And I remember in my nan and granddad's house, when they were sorting through some of the loft after my nan passed away, we found like a box of old records, like with the Supremes and the Four Tops and Diana Ross and stuff like that, all like original vinyl. I don't know where that is now. That could have been worth a few quid, but yeah, it was a mixture of those two things. I also remember the song "Running Up That Hill" by Kate Bush.
Very popular now. You're on trend now.
Oh yeah, totally. Yeah. I need to get my my baseball shirt on with whatever that club is that they were all a member of on there.
Exactly.
Hellfire Club.
Thank you.
Yeah, and yeah, I remember that used to listen to Kate Bush a lot. So that was what my parents were really into. But I mean, if you want to just widen this slightly, my neighbor my friend's father up the road, I actually remember around the same when I started becoming aware of like music, really like records and stuff. And I distinctly remember he had Iron Maiden, Number of the Beast. I must have been 5 or 6 at the time, and I remember distinctly it left an impression on me because I remember the album cover being a bit like, "Whoa, what's this?" It looks a bit scary.
100%.
And that was that at that age. I didn't listen to it, I don't think. And but I remember now as an adult, like remember now seeing that album cover as a child, and maybe that planted the seed within me for metal. You know,
the curiosity.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, like then it scared me a little bit. So I think as an adult, I keep going back to try and be intimidated more by music, and I think that's what kind of led me from Bon Jovi to Metallica to Sepultura to Deicide and so on.
Down the rabbit hole we both went. A similar story I've said on the podcast before. I was getting babysat, and Tim Donnelly, shout out to Tim Donnelly, had an Alice Cooper poster in his room. And I was terrified, but I must have been 3, 4, and I have a vivid memory of being very intimidated by this poster. And it's the same sort of at the video store when you go to the horror section back when there was VHSs in places, and just looking and perusing these movies that I would never rent because I was terrified of them, but totally intrigued by.
Yeah, the same. Yeah, movies that used to terrify me were zombie movies. I used to, I mean, to the point where I was actually terrified of like the idea that there could be such a thing as a zombie in real life. I remember as a probably 12, 13, my friend David Jenkins, not on Facebook, by the way, I've searched for him, but I had a friend then called David Jenkins, and his sister, I think, had this movie called Children Shouldn't Play with Dead Things on VCR. And I remember this was like a horror zombie movie about they found someone in the woods, they took this corpse back to the house, put it in bed upstairs, and it was then attracting all the other corpses to the house. And the movie was about them surviving, you know, as these zombies trying to attack them all. And I remember the scene at the end where the guy, everyone else has been killed, and he just throws himself off the first floor, like sort of banister, if you call it that, in Canada, into the zombies, just because he thought, I'm not going to live here. I'll just throw myself into and let them eat me. Remember that being really a bleak ending to a movie. So yeah, children shouldn't play with dead things. But yeah, like you were just saying there, looking at the back cover of the videos in the video store and being like, oh my God, that I literally could not cope with that movie. I remember like looking at Halloween or Friday the 13th and just thinking, I don't think I could handle that. And even to this day, I'm not great with horror movies. Generally. Don't know why.
I'm intrigued by them. I follow. There's nothing cool anymore that's new, right? There's a few that stand out nowadays, and I won't name them because there's very one side or the other. Controversial is the word of what good horror is nowadays. But I totally agree. I'd more rather like a fantasy type thing to let my mind loose than some. There's nothing original anymore, and that's the issue with life, right? And creative stuff. That's why they're rehashing everything. Do you remember your first live music experience, the first show that you went to go see?
First time I ever saw a band live was probably if I recall correctly, it would have been a band called Ash, and they were a band that I listened to a lot when I was 16, 17, and they were sort of like pop punk sort of type of music. And I remember going on the train to Manchester to see them with my girlfriend at the time, and I remember that was probably them. They had a song called "Girl from Mars," which I remember was quite a big hit for them in relative terms. And I don't listen to them now much, to be honest. I find them quite annoying when I listen to them now. But they were probably the first live band that I'd seen. I mean, by that point, I was already like completely into like Helmet and Fudge Tunnel and like Nirvana and stuff like that. You know, I'd already gone into that kind of music, so they were quite light, really, for me at the time. But I still remember going to that show and thinking, oh yeah, this is cool. But it didn't give me the same buzz as going like when I first saw, I don't know, when I saw Fu Manchu play live for the first time after obsessing over them for years. And I was like, whoa, this is like amazing. You know, when I watched Ash, it was kind of like a different vibe. And I was with my girlfriend, so obviously just making out all night or whatever we did back then at 16.
I love it. Do you remember your first time on stage?
I do. The first show I ever played. Actually, yeah, the first time I played on stage was probably in a small social club near to where I lived in Crosby, which is a small part of Liverpool. And we rented this like social club up the road, called the Crosby Social Club, if I remember rightly. And so we rented it, told everyone in the local bar that we were going to play. My band at the time was called Release. And that was the first time we actually played on stage. So we played like one or two of our own songs, and then we played a few covers. So of course those covers were the sort of music that we collectively thought would be a good idea at the time. So we were doing like Green Day, Basket Case, and Nirvana, Breed, a couple of the songs like that. And we did a couple of our own songs. I recall it being actually kind of cool, and it was really, really busy.
That's good.
I thought, oh wow, this is great. This being in the band's really awesome. We even like we put on the show and charged people to come in, and so everyone finished in the pub, which is called the Berkey, the Birkenhead Arms, I think it's called, and everyone came down to this social club, like a 10-minute walk straight after the show on a Friday night, and it was absolutely heaving. And we played this show, I don't know, played about half an hour, 40 minutes, and it was cool. I don't remember too much about the performance, probably terrible, but I just remember this feeling of, oh yeah, this is it, we're playing shows. The first show we actually ever played was a couple of weeks before this, on the top floor of our local McDonald's.
Really?
That's where I worked at the time, and our manager at the time, Neil McClelland, not manager, we didn't have a manager then. Our bass player at the time, Neil McClelland, was one of the managers in McDonald's. So when we weren't up all night, getting up to no good, like after hours in the restaurant, you know, drinking and whatnot, making food or whatever, you know, things we shouldn't have been doing in the restaurant after hours, we just arranged this like show, and about 4 or 5 of the existing staff members came and sat and were having a few drinks, and then we played a show. And I remember the snare drum stand broke, so we used like a plastic tub that the cloths normally got stored in as a snare stand.
Amazing.
Yeah.
So you're there. There's this thing that circulates on the internet about the band playing in a Denny's. I don't know if you've seen this. It's like a hardcore band. So you guys were doing this way before that.
Yeah, that's been done. We've done that, and you know, bought made the movie, bought the t-shirts. We're way past that now. I think one of the challenges is to have a show on a plane. No one's ever done that in midair.
Challenge accepted. Let's do it.
Yeah, I'm totally up for it.
Let's book it.
Yeah.
I'm from Montreal. This is a Heavy Montreal Presents Vox and Hops episode. Montreal has such a vivid, rich musical experience. I grew up here with the possibility in my mind that it was obtainable to become a touring musician. It didn't seem out of reach touring, practicing in Cité 2000. You know, you walking down the halls. Before I was in Cryptopsy, I would see members of Cryptopsies go by. I would see Cataclysm. I would see Despised Icon. It seemed obtainable. Being from Liverpool, obviously one of the biggest bands in the world, was from there, from a different generation, obviously. But was there like a vibe in Liverpool that you could become a famous musician or a accomplished musician?
Yeah, there was, and Matt, it was all I wanted to do since the age of 16.
Since that show, that's awesome.
Yeah, since then, and I was just starting to pick up the guitar then. I remember a guy in a leather jacket shop in Manchester showed me how to play power chords.
Really?
Yeah, my granddad saved up pennies and 5-pence pieces, and he gave me £100 on my birthday, and I took it to this leather guitar shop. And I remember the guy must have been talking to me about music or whatever, and I was saying I was into Nirvana and whatnot, but I was trying to learn the guitar, and he showed me how to play a power chord. And I remember he wrote on a brown piece of paper 6 strings, then 1, and then 2, 2, and I'm like, oh yeah. So then I got home and I could play a power chord then. So that's when I
could do this everywhere. It works everywhere.
Yeah, exactly. And like, are you telling me Smells Like Teen Spirit? That's all this is, and that was like a big light bulb moment for me. So when I started to when I got a band together, after telling my mate Will Halliday over chips, curry sauce, and fried rice at lunch one day, and while we should have been in school, I'm going to be in a band, you know, when I'm older, and I kind of promised myself, and I've stuck to it. But I remember when we were practicing in Crash Studios in Liverpool, just off Dale Street, and I remember this one time. One of the guys, I think it may have been Lee or Brian, I'm not sure, from Cathedral, they would rehearse there sometimes. I remember him coming in barefoot into the bar area where you could get like a can of Coke or whatever. And I remember looking at him and thinking, whoa, this like those guys, like obviously walking around here barefoot, they must feel pretty comfortable here. Mm-hmm. Asking the guy behind the bar, like, I think his name was Matt or something. Maybe it was Tony, I'm not sure. That would have been a coincidence, wouldn't it, if it was your name? But he was like, he was like, oh, that's Cathedral. I was like, oh shit, okay. And I just heard about them because I was starting to get into more like sort of heavier music, Black Sabbath and stuff like that. And I knew that they were some way aligned to that. And I was like, oh yeah. So and then not so long after that, I remember Anathema's like road cases were in the doorway because that's where they rehearsed to sometimes. Yeah. And I remember I just started to think like, you know, this is what I want to do, you know, and that feeling has never left me, you know, that hunger that I had then. Like I didn't know how to do it then.
Yeah.
Now I feel as though I've got a bit more of an idea. Obviously now I've been on the road a bit, and you know we're kind of reasonably confident that we'll get to go on the road again soon. You know, we've got tours in the diary and all that kind of thing. But yeah, from a very early age, I just knew that I wanted to do it. I didn't know how I was going to do it at all, but I just knew that this is something I can hang my hat on, and it's something that I want to do. I'll do it around my career if I have to, but really this is what I want to do full time. And really, yeah, everything I've done in my life since then has sort of been with that in mind. You know, like the careers that I worked in human resource management and was, you know, quite a senior position. But that was built up and in the back of my mind, I knew that I didn't want to do that. And as soon as I could jump from that to music full time, I was going to, and I did in 2013. And it was only because of lockdown I had to take on a day job again. So I went from 2013 to May 2021.
Wow.
Just full time in music without having to take on a day job. So I'm felt pretty proud of myself for that. But obviously then bills pile up and everything in lockdown, so I had to take on a day job with the government in the UK of all things. So, but yeah, I from a very early age, that's all I wanted to do. But I remember now that sense of adventure back then, not knowing like how am I going to do this? Who do I talk to? How do I ever get to play outside of Liverpool? What venues do I go and give my demo to in Liverpool? I had no idea. There was no structure. And I remember on the bar in Liverpool, there was this little A5 booklet, like an industry guide. And in there was like you thumb through and it was just the names of all like artist managers and record labels and venues and promoters, and with the names like a small telephone book. I don't remember if it had their number in there or just their address or both. I'm not sure. But I remember that was the industry guide and you could buy it with like 5 or 10 quid and it would be updated every year. And like that then planted a seed for what we mentioned earlier. And I always just knew like I wanted to sort of always interested in the business side of music, but I just knew that I want to do music full time. And I tell you one thing which really sparked my interest as well is the video for Live Tonight Sold Out, Nirvana video that they brought out. And I remember being just really attracted to that, like being in a van on the road. The van might break down tomorrow, but I don't care. Might get the tire might get a blowout, but I don't care. I'm on the road doing my own thing, and I'm like touring, playing my music to people who don't know me. And I think it was that sense of sort of adventure and showing off, like playing your music to people who like the idea that someone in another country or another town would have bought music that I've made and would be excited about me and my band going to travel to where they are to play, and they would buy a ticket and come and see us and spend their time. That was something to me. I knew I just wanted that. I just wanted to do music, and equally to do with the expression of being able to like create something. You know, from an early age, I've always been like singing into a microphone, like recording it on my mum and dad's stereo, just singing nonsense, and then playing it back to hear how it sounded. So I think it's kind of always been something I've been into. I don't really know what the first spark was. Just something just made me realize that this is what I want to do, and I've stuck to it. So I'm pretty proud of that.
Absolutely amazing. When something, as you said, I had a flash. If you are on the road now and there is a blowout, what is your mentality in that moment? Do you go back to that sense of adventure, or are you like, fuck, we're gonna miss this gig? Do you have to mentally remind yourself, no, I'm supposed to really enjoy this moment?
Yeah, no, always. Could you just repeat the first part of that question, please, Matt?
Oh, sorry. It's the like if you're on the road now and obstacles do occur, because they do.
Yep.
Let's say like a blowout does happen in your van, or your van breaks down. Do you have to remind yourself that back in the day you would have killed to be here?
Yeah. We've had a few blowouts and a few moments like that. We've never actually had to cancel a show though because of them, fortunately. But yeah, I remember one time when we had a burst tire on our way to in France. Unfortunately, it was on a day off. I remember one time we were in Bozeman, Montana, and we were traveling in through the hills there on our way to Bozeman, from Salt Lake City. And I remember that we crashed into a snowbank in the hills. You know, God knows what was on the other side of that snowbank. I don't like to think about it. And I remember sitting there thinking, being quite relaxed about it. And exactly like you mentioned earlier on, it's like, even if I freeze to death, there's a lot better than sitting in the office getting told off because I didn't hit my targets. You know, it's like, at least this is what I was meant to do. If I die doing it, then so be it. You know, I'd rather live for 20 years on the plains being free than live for 50 years sat in a cage in a zoo. And I guess that's how I think about life sometimes. But yeah, fortunately, we've not had anything that's been life-threatening or anything that's made us give up one of our shows, fortunately, because I have seen other bands sadly have had those issues, but touch wood, we've avoided it so far.
Absolutely, and I agree. Touch wood for both of our careers, because I haven't had to cancel much either. Evidence of Immortality. Perfect transition. I like that. New record came out to be a Napalm on August 19th. Banger of a record. I really enjoy it. Something that really rings true about Conan, and I mentioned it earlier, is the fact that you guys work internally a lot. You work with the same visual artist the whole time, Anthony Roberts. I think that's so cool. Continuous. It's like a part of the band. I love that. The production is all handled by Chris, the bassist of the band. And talk to me about keeping everything within house and having basically the identity of Conan being more than just the sum of its musicians.
Yeah, we have a settled team, and I think that is something that I've always been keen on, because it gives we have a sense of familiarity, we have a sense of consistency, and the only thing that really we have to worry about is writing the music.
Exactly. Yeah.
Tony's always there. We know we don't need to write an album and think, who are we going to get to do the art this time? We know that we don't have to think about shit. Where are we going to record? Who would produce this? And then obviously with the mastering, we've been using James Plotkin. I say using, we've been working with James Plotkin on every album so far. And James is like an amazing mastering engineer. From his time in Carnate, he understands like heavy and low frequencies and stuff, which is why we went to him. And he has been brilliant. And I like this. It almost feels like a family kind of atmosphere. Like, when we got an album, I know when to interact with these people along the journey we have with an album. Like Tony likes to get involved relatively early in the writing process, because a lot of the ideas he has are sparked directly by what we are doing in the studio. So like if we're like slow with bringing demos or lyrics to him, it really has an impact upon the artwork that he creates. And whilst that might cause a little bit of inertia, it at the same time really organic, because we feel as though like, well, if we're not, how can we expect him to come up with something awesome if the reference point isn't true? Like if we're like expecting him to come up with like a good Conan album cover, but he hasn't heard the new album yet, or he hasn't, how is that possible? And I see a lot with people sort of selling their artwork online, or this will make a great
your
album.
your logo here.
Exactly. And I'm like, oh, that kind of doesn't, that might be cool for some people. Fair enough. I respect people's differences, but for me, I like having Tony along with us for the ride. He's like a member of the band almost. And I know it brings with it kind of sort of a pressure that I enjoy. Like, I'm not just writing music for us in the band, it's also for Tony, so we can make the artwork cool. So that's great. Obviously, it's not the same with James in a way, because he doesn't get involved at all until we've mixed the album, and then it goes across to him. Of course, having Chris in the band, Chris joined the band after we recorded Blood Eagle, and Phil decided to leave. So Chris has been in the band since early 2013. So that level of consistency in having like someone else in the band who understands the sound is incredibly it offers a lot of it steadies the ship a lot. And I think because of that, we've been able to write music that is sort of varies a bit, but is still quite consistent in structure and everything else. We've experimented a little bit here and there, but having Chris in the band, and he's always got his producer's head on when we're jamming and when we're writing songs. So he'll always tell me if, oh, actually that's shit, that's no good or whatever. And I really appreciate that, because I know that he's not just saying it because he's grumpy. He's saying it because he can imagine how that will sound when we come to record it in the studio. And that's something that is really good for us too. Slightly wider than that, we've been on the same label now since we signed with Napalm in 2012 after we released Monos. And at this album, that we've not had any negotiations yet on extending our relationship beyond this album. So right now, I guess we're a free agent, if that's how it's seen. But having Napalm as our label for all that time, again, gives consistency, gives us a sense of sort of feeling settled. I never really wanted to be on a different label for every album. That to me just seemed like a weird way of doing it. So having like a long relationship in Napalm, especially a label they're quite a big label, a very big label. So to have to have them sort of supporting us on a promotional side, when the album comes out, they're very good at the promo side of it, hooking me up with the interviews with people like yourself and getting like really cool exposure for the album. Like, you might not get that with other labels. And I think over time, obviously they trust us, so they will invest that time and effort in arranging things like this for us. And all of these things, you might not sort of appreciate their impact individually, but collectively, sort of like it's made us what we are now. Like from where we joined in 2012 to where we are now, the difference is huge. And I don't think that's just because we're still together after all that time. I think it's because of we've sort of had this process or this strategy, which wasn't really deliberate at first, but over time it's become obvious, is to have like a consistent team alongside us. Marie, our tour manager, she's been with us since 2012 as well.
It's amazing.
Yeah, she's French. She lives in Germany. She's in America. Where is she now? I don't even know where she is now. She travels a lot. So she's somewhere in the world. She's alive. I know that much because she was on Facebook earlier. So she travels a lot. We were just in Brazil a couple of weeks ago in Sao Paulo. She was there with us. Just happened to be in Sao Paulo for a couple of weeks to hang out with us and be at the show. And she's on tour now. Another band, we'll see her on Wednesday in Manchester. So having these connections is good on a professional level. Also on a personal level, it makes the band more than just a band. We got all these people that we care about them. Tony's our friend, Marie's our friend, Chris is in the band, so he's a friend and a colleague. And I don't know, it makes the whole experience really enjoyable for me, because I feel like settled. I feel like this is like we're collectively a team, and that really helps. Because I think if I felt like it was just me and I had to find a new label every album, or I had to find a new artist, there'd be no consistency there. I mean, just look at Iron Maiden. If you're talking about artwork, they got the Eddie theme since day one, I guess, and we've had this, the same guy on our album cover, which we sort of called him the Sentinel, for just couldn't think of a better name, to be honest. But he's kind of always been there as well. And I don't know if that was Tony's idea at first or not. But I don't know. We wouldn't have had that if we'd have switched artists every album. And I don't think I guess we got like a reputation for being heavy or whatever. I'm not sure we'd have that same level of reputation for being a heavy band if we'd have switched producers every time, or if we'd have switched mastering people every time. I don't know. I just enjoy the consistency, because I know then that if we lose out in any way, it's because the music was no good, which is on me or on the band. The other guys are consistent and very professional. So I guess I don't like changing things too much.
It's the tying back to that uncertainty that we were talking about earlier.
Yeah,
about the beginning of the pandemic. You've cut out all the uncertainties when it comes to Conan.
Yeah.
The only thing you have to focus on is writing good music.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and that's hard enough. Because it is, isn't it? It's hard. It is hard enough, and I think people take that for granted when they hear an album. Is just how much it takes out of the people who write the album. I mean, honestly, I don't particularly enjoy writing music. For the most part, I enjoy jamming and coming up. That like, oh yeah, this is cool. That bit's amazing. But like sitting there and thinking, okay, so what comes after this verse? Where do we go with the riff next? All of that, I find like it feels like I'm giving birth. It's just kind of like I find it difficult actually. So when it's all recorded and the drums are down, it's only at that point that I really start to enjoy it. Like I love going in the studio then. And setting the amps up and then recording guitars, even though it's like kind of like a stiff process, then I still enjoy that. But all the way up until then, sort of the writing, which is the looser kind of more fun bit in most people's eyes, I'm not sure I enjoy it the same. I don't know why.
Well, I think once the drums are done, it's the song structure is set in stone, right? So there's no ambiguity of where the riffs are going to go at that point, because it's going this way, because that's been done. You mentioned, sorry, finish that thought and then I have something.
Yeah, I was just saying, I feel like it's written then. The album's written, we can just record it. Up until the drums are recorded, it's kind of not written yet. That's how I see it.
You mentioned recording remotely for the first time. It was for Evidence of Immortality?
Yeah, we didn't record remotely. We wrote it. If I said record,
Okay.
that was my bad. That was a mistake.
Maybe I misheard you. Yeah.
No, it's okay. We wrote it remotely.
Which is strange too, because you typically would have done it in a room together.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, absolutely. I have. I mean, I'm sat now on my computer desk. I've got like a couple of small studio monitors. I've got an input device, and I would sit here and I'd play along to a drum machine, come up with a riff. If I was prior to the pandemic, I was doing a lot of ungraven writing with Easy Drummer. So I was writing songs along to a drum machine because that's how I was going to be, a drum machine and me. And so in the pandemic for Conan, I started using the drum machine to work on riffs. Because obviously Johnny couldn't be here. He lives in Dublin, so he wasn't allowed to fly over here for the most part. We got together once or twice, but for the most part, we weren't allowed. So I would work with a drum machine here, and then I would come up with like whole songs sometimes, and then I would send them over to Johnny and Chris, and then they would like tell me if they liked it or not. At one point,
it's a scary moment when you send off a file like that and you're waiting for them to respond versus seeing someone's facial reaction in a jam room.
It's sort of like on Facebook, you're like praying in somewhere, please like it,
like you see that they've seen it,
Yeah, I think I've seen it for 2 days, and I'm like, oh my god, you feel like
they hate it.
Yeah, just be honest, guys. That sort of thing. I did that a lot. I mean, I must have probably 50 ideas that I came up in lockdown, not of whole songs, but like a riff or a passage or a transition from a riff to another riff. And at one point, I bought Johnny a electric drum kit, and we tried. Like I would write a riff and I would send it to him with the time signature and the tempo, and then he would then load that in his Reaper on his computer, and then he would set the tempo. But if we found that it was like distorting, it was like time stretching the guitar riff, and it didn't work for us. So we dropped that idea, and I think he broke like the snare drum or something like that because he hits pretty hard. But we got like one or two cool things from it. But yeah, we eventually we came up with like a collection of riffs and songs, which when we finally started to get in the same room, I think it was like November 2021, last year, we found ourselves writing the songs actually pretty quick. Because we'd had all of that time together before in online sort of sharing ideas, that the songs came together pretty fast, which I think was something I didn't expect. I expected it to be a real chore putting the album together in the studio. Thought it was going to be really difficult for us. But I was like, oh yeah, remember that riff? And then I play it on guitar in the studio in front of like a full stack. And I was like, oh my God, this sounds so good. And I'd slow it down a bit and I'd be like, Johnny, you play along. And I'm like, I've got goosebumps now, just like playing it. And that happened a lot because sitting in front of the computer, and I don't have the computer very loud because we've got neighbors, it's like, it sounds okay here, but to a drum machine, Easy Drummer brought out a Conan drum sample. So yeah. I forget the drummer's name now, but he's from Scandinavia, Sweden, I think, in a death metal band there. And again, I forget the name, but he did like it, just like you can like download like the Conan drum sample. So of course I did that. I bought the pack and was writing riffs along to that, and I thought that was kind of a weird thing to do, but that was cool. A lot of those ideas made it on the album, which was great.
Very, very interesting. We tried writing on Zoom altogether. It was a nightmare. It was
slightly out from one another.
We typically write just riffs type thing is how Cryptopsy put stuff together for our new album, and we did a few sessions. It was not the most fun, but we had to try, right?
Yeah, of course, yeah. At least you can say then that you have given it a go. You don't let it.
But then we quickly got in a room together, and it ended up working out better that way.
Yeah,
there is like a bright future for death metal. There's a whole bunch of like these new younger bands I'll name a few now, such as like Sanguisugabah, Frozen Soul, 200 Stab Wounds, Undeath, Creeping Death, I think is not one. I might be wrong with that one. Just so many young bands that are waving the death metal flag. So I am very confident that when bands such as mine and others from the 90s generation are no longer there, these younger bands will be pushing death metal to the masses. Is that happening with Doom?
Yeah, there are plenty of bands who are coming through who are younger than me. They all seem younger than me now. You put me on the spot by naming them, and honestly, I couldn't name that many of them. Elder Druid are a cool band. They're from over in Belfast. My friend Jake plays in that band. You got Tuskar. They're a great two-piece band from London. In fact, their drummer's our UK booking agent, Tyler. I'm sure he'll be delighted that I've given him a mention here. So yeah, there's always a consistent flow of bands coming through, and yeah, I mean, I don't get out to shows all that often, honestly, but when we play festivals, I am always very keen to watch the other bands, and you know, noticing the other bands that bands that I didn't recognize or I didn't know of that are coming through. You know, I mean, a band that's really hitting it big now is Green Lung. They're another band from London, like sort of like a bit like Pallbearer, I guess. They're like that kind of doom, you know, like sort of, they can actually play their guitars, whereas I like to think of ourselves as being like just like super simple, heavy, but like more influenced by the likes of Nail Bomb or Fudge Tunnel. That's where our idea of doom metal comes from. You know, we're not like a Sabbath tribute band or anything like that. So yeah, there's like there are lots of cool bands coming through. And you know, I think like when we're dead and gone, you know, the doom metal will carry on in rude health the same way it did before we came around. You know, you're forgetting the likes of Cathedral, Electric Wizard. You know, they Trouble, and you know, lots of cool bands were already in place when we started thinking about doing this. So yeah, it's a genre of music that has been healthy for a long time, and I'm glad for it. I guess it's become a little bit more like popular now. I mean, there are like bigger festivals now they've got like a stage that would be dedicated to just kind of do metal or that kind of music. You know, Hellfest have the Temple stage, isn't it? And, you know, we've headlined the Sophie Lancaster stage at Bloodstock.
Yeah.
You know, and we've traveled all over the world playing what, you know, the industry recognizes as doom metal. It's cool, you know. It's for a band that I think for a band at our level probably wouldn't have been able to do that prior to the onset of the internet, because I think there were less bands that got recognized enough to go and tour properly. I think now there are more bands, so naturally there are more bands that labels take a chance on, and there are more bands that get to play festivals and travel. I feel like music now there's a lot more money in it. Like generally, don't know, I think shows are quite well attended, and I just what I'm trying to say is that I don't think we would have been able to enjoy the traveling and whatnot that we've done if we'd have came around maybe in the 90s, for example, when, you know, it was more difficult to get noticed. I think then bands that became successful in that era sort of it was more difficult for them. So I kind of really respect that. You know, there are way more bands now, but that doesn't mean that they're all awesome though.
That's true.
But I think back then, those bands that did make it through were all awesome, and that's how I kind of see it. I don't know whether that's the right way of saying it, but
they definitely had to fit within a mold to make it back then. Nowadays, it's because the internet is the power. The fans are in control of what they're consuming with streaming. It's easier for people to listen to exactly what they want to, and there's a lot to listen to, and it's not all good. You're right about.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah,
one person might like it though.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, and it's true. I think the reason why it's okay to say what we've just said is because there are just way more bands.
Mm-hmm.
So of course there's good and bad. When there were less bands that you took notice of, then they were probably amazing to get to that point anyway.
Absolutely.
To get to the point where Kerrang would write about Bolt Thrower, there were probably 50 other bands who probably were trying to get there but never did. Whereas now, you'll hear about Bolt Thrower, and all of those 50 other bands have got a Facebook page.
That's true. And it's like similar artists. If you like Bolt Thrower, you may like.
Yeah, and there's a big stream of them, yeah. So, yeah, I mean, it's cool. It's actually really good because we get, there's more opportunities for bands to go on tour. And, I mean, just last week we were in Poland, 2 weeks, the week before that we were in Sao Paulo. This weekend we've got a weekend off and with the kids and my wife. Next weekend I'm in France. Me and my wife are going to France. We're playing, but my wife's going to come with us for the trip.
Love it.
And we got other bits and bobs coming through between now and the end of the year. So I think it's created more opportunity. The fact that the internet has made things just wider.
100%. Maybe talk about the management thing. Let's go back to that. Managing bands. I wonder if your time working in H&R really had an impact on knowing how to be a good manager.
I guess in some ways, yeah. The HR management role was less about dealing with individual people, more about dealing with processes.
Mm-hmm.
When I worked in HR, it was more to do with making sure that the organization didn't dismiss people the wrong way. Like, did they have the right letter? Did they, rather than dealing with an individual person's issues, which you did from time to time, because if that became a grievance or an attendance problem, then you'd have. But my job was more like zooming out and looking at the organization and saying, is this going to cause us an issue? And I guess drawing a comparison between that and sort of like managing bands, you could say that my idea for the management agency was that we would take a look at a band and sort of like just take a snap look at where they're at currently and just say, okay, well, you don't sell much merch, let's focus on that for a bit. You've not toured outside your hometown in 12 months, let's have a look at that problem. And just taking like a holistic approach to it, if that's the right word, like looking at the band as a whole and saying what's good, what's not, rather than a band sending me an email and saying, will you speak to Tony for me? I want an endorsement with Orange. I was more like, okay, let's look at things in general for you. And I think that is because of my work in HR, I think, is looking at, taking a zoomed out sort of view of the band. And that was what I hoped to do. I mean, the agency didn't really last all that long, to be honest with you. I'm not sure that was what was demanded from us. So we tried for a little while and we worked with some cool bands and arranged some cool stuff. But maybe it wasn't. It was, we had lots of bands who wanted to work with us, but I found it was for us to charge the amount of money that made it like a good business proposition. It didn't really sit well with the bands that we were working with, because a lot of those bands who came to us were small to medium-sized bands who, of course, don't have a lot of disposable income. And,
and a percentage of anything is a lot at that level.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And we would charge, $50 a month. We'll help you with any problems you've got for $50 a month. And we'll try and sort of help you get set up in certain areas. And after a while, it became that we had like 1 million bands who wanted to work with us $50 a month.
It's not realistic for you.
No, exactly. And I've got to manage my own band too, so, and my own life around that. So it just quickly became untenable. So it's on ice at the moment. The website's still there and stuff. We'll still work with some bands.
But now the software that you're working on too.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Talk more about that. Yeah.
Yeah. So in around about May 2020, I'd had an idea for 6 months prior to that for this thing called SceneGen. We were going to call it a tour book at that point, but it's too
based on that book that you had in that bar.
Exactly. So the inspiration behind it was exactly that particular that book, the industry guide, and also this. You may have heard of it, called like a printed magazine, a DIY magazine called Book Your Own Fucking Life.
No, that's a
Did you hear
great
that?
name. No, it's a great name.
If you get a chance, it's really fascinating read. You look up Book Your Own Fucking Life on Facebook. Sorry, on Google or whatever search engine you use. We all use Google now, don't we? Let's face it. But and it was I think every 3 to 6 months there was a magazine printed, and it was like just alphabetical order, you know, Cleveland, Ohio, record labels, and it'd be a list of
Really?
awards.
Booking agents, managers,
basement shows. And if you were like
Amazing.
heading to Cleveland and your show was pulled, well, I'll give this guy a ring, and because he's on here as someone who'll let us sleep on his couch, you know, that kind of thing.
Amazing.
So it was like an industry guide, but really targeted at, you know, specific regions. So you could almost pick it up and it'd be just like a like the phone book,
Yeah,
you know, for the industry. And nothing like that has ever been around. You know, it was never digitalized. They tried, but then nothing came of it. And but like having that management agency, and I just got to thinking that it'd be cool to sort of bring back that kind of thinking, but make it an online software platform that everyone can log into. And, you know, we can, because networking on Facebook is no good. You know, now you go on Facebook, within 2 minutes you're looking at reels over and over again because they're really
and if you're not connected to a person, they're not going to see the message. So many times I won't even send a person a message unless we're connected, or I have someone make an introduction in a messenger feed for me, because then I know the person's going to see it. To write a dead end like message to someone, it goes into the void of this other folder.
Yeah.
And if they don't sit there and go through it, and being who we are, we have thousands of people that write us sometimes. It gets lost. So I think it's a really good idea.
Yeah, and thank you. And it's something that, you know, we've been working on it since. I mean, for about 6 months, I had this idea in my head, and I did work with someone to do like a very basic version of it. Then May 2000, my friend Morton from Copenhagen said to me, I was talking to him about it, and they said, let me take a look at it. So I sent him like the screenshots, and he was like, no, that's not a good idea because this and this. And I was like, well, what do you know? And he says, well, I'm a software developer. I was like, no way. And I've known Morton since 2012. And he's like a senior back-end developer for, you know, a digital agency in Denmark. So I said, well, do you want to come on and help me build this? So Morton came on, then we had a few other team members come on board, and now we've got a little team building this thing. And our thinking is that, you know, I, in a band, would set up a profile for Conan. I would put on the system the people that I know already, and I would send them an invite. So they would join as well. So you'd have like the promoter that I know in Brussels, for example, a Magazine 4. So I'd add him to the system, him or her to the system. And then that's how we would converse within the system. So when we're negotiating a show, we would open up a date in the calendar, and our conversation related to that show would happen in that calendar entry only. There'd be no like massive
messenger feed or email thread or
with millions of different subject titles, and you got to like, well, which email was that? You know, if we're talking about that show on the 4th of May, you click on the 4th of May in your calendar, and the latest topic, the latest chat is in there. And within there, you would share the documents you need. Your profile would have your tech spec on it already, so you put on your and it would look a bit like MySpace, your own artist profile, but it would have on there all the information that the promoter would ordinarily have to chase you 3 or 4 times for.
Exactly. Your logo.
Yeah, all that's
backline, your rider, all the pertinent stuff.
Yeah, and then the other way with the venue, they would also have a profile on there, so you'd be able to see their calendar straight away, which is handy for promoters or booking agents, and they want to book Magazine 4 on the 4th of May. They would check their calendar first, and then they would send them a message. So whoever had set up the profile for Magazine 4 would get a ping and be like, oh yeah, I've got a message there off John, the promoter, who's bringing Cryptopsy here on the 4th of December. You've got availability. And then, but a lot of it would be automated, which is I'm letting the developers take care of. I'm just this mad guy who says it'd be cool if they could do this.
Yes.
And so but we've been developing it now for a couple of years, and we've just a few 2 months ago, we were invited to make a full application for a government grant for the High Growth Innovation Fund from Liverpool City region here. And we were passed as eligible, which is like half the battle. So they invited us to make a full application, and the deadline for letting bands know is this Friday. So we'll know either way by this Friday. But we also have a private sector investor who's going to match those funds as well. So we're hoping by this time next week we'll have been given the go ahead on this grant, which means that we'll have all of this built by spring next year. If we don't get the grant, then the investor still wants to work with us, but of course the deadline becomes a little bit softer then, because we don't have this government stipulation to have it done by a certain date. But yeah, it's always very exciting for us.
Very exciting. I think it's a great idea, and it will cut so many pointless conversations if it's just all automated, especially when booking stuff. And then there's so many meaningless emails that we do when it could just automatically be somewhere. All this information.
Yeah, your day sheet. Thank you. Your day sheet would become the info would go from the offer into the day sheet. Yeah. Both parties would be invited regularly. You haven't filled in this yet. Please fill it in. So you wake up to an email, or not an email. You wake up to a message when you log in. You've not put the hotel details in, and the booker would put that in. For the band's perspective, that you've not yet confirmed that you've not confirmed your load in for 4:30. Is that time going to be okay for you? So then, so on and so forth. And all these things are automated within the system. So the information that goes in the day sheet, a lot of that will go into the contract. And on the day of the show, you get a message saying, "Would you like to invoice for this show now?" You click yes, invoice goes, and obviously the promoter gets the invoice, then pay it hopefully, and so on and so forth.
Sounds like tour managers will love this the most, because advancing tours is a fucking pain in the ass. But
yeah, I think you're right. From finding out who that person is in Brussels to deal with, right all the way through to getting paid, it all happens within SceneGen. You don't have to open your emails. You don't have to send them anything on Dropbox. You don't have to show them your Bandcamp links if you're a band trying to get a support slot. You don't have to message them on your private Facebook profile and on WhatsApp. All of these things you don't need to do.
These things that we do. That's so funny. Great idea, John. I think it's super cool, and I'm excited to see what comes with that. I have one last question for you. Classic Vox and Hops wrap-up question. You mentioned you don't drink very often, but every once in a while, especially when we're playing in Belgium, it happens to all of us. What is your hangover cure?
If I was in Belgium, probably a cold kebab or some chips and mayonnaise. That would work the next day, or pizza if there's any left in the room where you're sleeping. Yeah. But I'm from over in the UK, so it has to be a full English breakfast. That would be the one.
Hell yes. Yeah. John, thank you so much for taking the time hanging out with me, talking about your life, music, craft beer. I had an absolute blast. Everyone, go listen to the new Conan record, Evidence of Immortality. You won't regret it. It's a banger. I love it. John, thank you so much. Cheers.
All the best. Nice to meet you.
Hey, thank you all so much for listening right today. You know that I love and appreciate that. Man, this is an awesome conversation with John. Sometimes we just connect, and this was one of those instances. I am in love with this software idea that he's building called SceneGen. What a better way for bands to finally take their careers into their hands. What a brilliant idea. I am 100% behind this, and I cannot wait to see where John takes this. I think it's brilliant. Everyone should be in control of their careers. Everyone should be able to connect with people and have conversations. And there are far too many gatekeepers. So hopefully SceneGen is something that cuts through that. And it's a great idea. I can't tell John that enough. Awesome conversation. Awesome idea. Massive cheers to John for hanging out with me. If you enjoyed this Vox and Hops episode, you should sign up to the Vox and Hops Metal Podcast mailing list. You can do that on my website, voxandhops.com. That's VOXANDHOPS.com. When you do that, you shall receive one email a month that will contain all of the details of everything that has happened recently in the world of the Vox Vox and Hops Metal Podcast. You get to see which episodes I dropped recently. We'll get to see which episodes I have coming up. You also get to see which albums the Vox and Hops album review crew have reviewed recently, and you will get to hear about any projects I have in the works before I announce them to the public, and I always have a lot of stuff going on. You will also get to see which albums Jerry Monk, Vox and Hops' metal architect, has added to the Brewtal Awakenings playlist. Jerry has the ear for what's going on in metal. If you're looking for new music, the Brewtal Awakenings playlist is what you want to be listening to. There is always a lot going on in the world of the Vox and Hops Metal Podcast, and I hate when you miss anything, so please sign up to the mailing list. The Vox and Hops Metal Podcast is brought to you by Soundtelling Media and Evergreen Podcasts. I hope you have a killer weekend. I will be back next week with one Heavy Montreal Presents Vox and Hops episode on Tuesday, but until then, remember to enjoy life, metal, and craft beer. Cheers, Vox and Hops heads.